Welcome, dear listeners, to this delightful, cozy mystery audiobook, Miss Marple and the Poisoned Wine at Rose Hall, a Miss Marple story. Settle in with a cup of tea as we journey back to the quaint English village of St. Mary Mead in the 1950s, where the incomparable Miss Jane Marple unravels a puzzling case of poisoned wine. Inspired by the timeless tales of Agatha Christie, this story is filled with clever clues, charming village life, and a satisfying resolution. Narrated in a warm, inviting style, our tale spans about 90 minutes. Thank you for joining us. Now, let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Rose Hall. In the tranquil village of St. Mary Mead, nestled in the rolling hills of the English countryside, autumn painted the landscape with hues of amber and crimson. The year was 1952, and the air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. At the heart of the village stood a modest cottage, its thatched roof adorned with climbing roses, home to Miss Jane Marple. She was an elderly lady, frail in appearance with her fluffy white hair and delicate lace shawl, but her bright blue eyes sparkled with a keen intelligence that few in St. Mary Mead fully appreciated. To most, she was merely a kind spinster who tended her garden and knitted scarves for distant relatives. But to those who knew her well, Miss Marple was a master of observation, her mind a tapestry woven with threads of human nature, each strand a lesson from years of watching village life unfold. On this particular October afternoon, Miss Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a soft blue scarf for her nephew Raymond's newest child. The sun cast dappled shadows through the apple trees, and a blackbird trilled nearby, its song a gentle counterpoint to the distant chime of the church bells. She was just considering whether to add a cable stitch when the postman, young Tommy Pierce, cycled up the lane, his cap slightly askew. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he called, dismounting with a grin. "A letter for you, from Rose Hall no less." He handed her a cream-colored over Dolly's homemade scones. She slit the envelope with a silver letter opener, revealing an invitation written in Dolly's looping hand. It requested her presence at a small dinner party that evening, to celebrate the Colonel's recent acquisition of a rare vintage wine collection from a Bordeaux vineyard. "A special evening, Jane," the note read. "Arthur is positively giddy about his new wines, and we'd love your company. Do come." Miss Marple smiled faintly. Wine was not her forte. She preferred a modest sherry, but the prospect of good company and a chance to observe the Bantry's eclectic guests was temptation enough. Besides, she thought, there was something about Rose Hall's grandeur that often brought out the most revealing facets of human behavior. Much like a certain garden party years ago, when a vicar's wife had let slip a secret over too much punch. By 6 o'clock, Miss Marple was ready, dressed in her best navy frock, a pearl brooch pinned to her collar, and her trusty black handbag tucked under her arm. The walk to Rose Hall was pleasant, the village lanes lined with hedgerows bursting with late blackberries. As she approached the manor, the setting sun bathed its stone facade in a golden glow, the windows glinting like polished mirrors. The gravel drive crunched underfoot, and the scent of late-blooming roses filled the air. Dolly Bantry was waiting at the door, her cheeks flushed with excitement, her floral dress slightly askew. "Jane, you darling!" Dolly exclaimed, enveloping her in a hug. "You're just in time. Arthur's been fussing over his wines all day, and we've such an interesting group tonight. Come, come." The drawing room of Rose Hall was a picture of elegance, with its polished mahogany furniture, chintz curtains, and a roaring fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. A crystal chandelier sparkled overhead, and a long oak table was set for dinner, its silverware gleaming. Colonel Bantry stood by a sideboard, proudly displaying his new wine collection. His military bearing was softened by a jovial smile, his mustache quivering as he gestured to a row of bottles, their labels adorned with French widowed sister-in-law, a striking woman of 40 with sharp cheekbones and a sleek black dress that spoke of city sophistication. Her fingers glittered with rings and a diamond pendant hung at her throat, catching the firelight. Lydia had returned to St. Mary Mead after her husband's death, and whispers suggested she coveted a share of the Bantry fortune. She smiled coolly at Miss Marple, her gaze appraising, much like a certain society lady Miss Marple recalled, who had once schemed over a contested will. Dr. Elias Hargrove, the village physician, stood near the fireplace, a scholarly figure with wire-rimmed glasses and a quiet demeanor. His gray suit was immaculate, and his hands, fine and precise, suggested a surgeon's skill. He had treated the colonel for a minor heart complaint recently, and his presence at Rose Hall was no surprise. His calm competence made him a frequent guest. Yet Miss Marple noticed a faint furrow in his brow, as if his thoughts were elsewhere, not unlike a chemist she once knew who had mislabeled a prescription with curious consequences. Finally, there was Miss Eleanor Finch, the Bantry's housekeeper, a sturdy woman in her 50s with a plain black dress and a starched apron. Her gray hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her hands, rough from years of service, clasped a tray of canapés. Eleanor had been with the Bantrys for decades, her loyalty unquestioned, though Miss Marple detected a certain tightness in her smile, reminiscent of a maid in her youth who harbored secrets beneath her deference. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining room, where a long table was adorned with a damask cloth, silver candelabras, and a centerpiece of autumn roses. The meal began with a creamy parsnip soup, followed by roast pheasant and buttered potatoes, each course paired with one of the colonel's prized wines. He stood to pour the 1928 Bordeaux himself, his face alight with pride. "To good friends, fine wine, and the joys of St. Mary Mead," he toasted, raising his glass. The others followed suit, though Miss Marple sipped cautiously, her palate unaccustomed to such richness. The conversation flowed easily. Dolly chattered about her eyes wide. Dr. Hargrove was at the colonel's side in an instant, loosening his collar and checking his pulse. "He's not breathing," he said grimly, his face pale. "I'm afraid he's gone." The room descended into chaos. Dolly sobbed, clinging to Miss Marple's arm, while Geoffrey paced, muttering, "This can't be happening." Lydia stood frozen, her composure cracking, and Eleanor dropped her tray, the clatter echoing in the stunned silence. Miss Marple, seated at the table's end, folded her napkin with deliberate calm, her eyes darting from face to face. She noted Geoffrey's trembling hands, Lydia's sudden pallor, Dr. Hargrove's quick efficiency, and Eleanor's fleeting glance toward the shattered glass. "It's the wine," Dr. Hargrove said quietly, sniffing the spilled Bordeaux. "There's a faint almond-like scent. Cyanide, I'd wager." Dolly gasped. "Poison? But how? Who would do such a thing?" Miss Marple said nothing, her knitting needles still in her bag, her mind already at work. The cozy warmth of Rose Hall had been shattered, and a mystery had taken root, as insidious as bindweed in a garden. She thought of a similar case in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a seemingly innocent tea party had masked darker intentions. Human nature, she mused, was ever predictable, yet always surprising in its depths. As the servants were called to fetch the police, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the table. The scattered glasses, the overturned bottle, the roses drooping slightly in their vase. Somewhere in this elegant room, among these familiar faces, lay the truth. And she, Jane Marple, would find it. Chapter 2: The Arrival of the Police. The morning after Colonel Bantry's shocking death at Rose Hall, the village of St. Mary Mead awoke to a hum of whispers. The sun rose over the thatched cottages, its pale light filtering through a mist that clung to the hedgerows. But the usual tranquility was shattered. News of the could respond. The crunch of tires on gravel announced the arrival of Inspector Slack, a brisk, square-jawed man from the county police, accompanied by his young sergeant, Lake. Slack was known in St. Mary Mead for his impatience and his tendency to jump to conclusions, a trait Miss Marple had observed in a hasty constable years ago who nearly arrested the wrong man for theft. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat curtly. "Nasty business, this. I've spoken with Dr. Hargrove. Cyanide in the wine, no doubt about it. Fast-acting. Deadly. We're treating it as murder." Dolly gasped, clutching her shawl. "Murder? But who would want to harm Arthur? He was the kindest soul." "Kind or not, someone had a motive," Slack replied, his notebook already open. "We'll need to question everyone who was at dinner. And I'll have my men search the cellar where that wine was stored." Miss Marple, seated quietly in an armchair, observed the inspector's brisk efficiency with a faint smile. He reminded her of a gardener who hacked at weeds without checking for delicate flowers nearby. "Might I suggest, Inspector," she said mildly, "that you examine the wine glasses as well? The poison may not have been in the bottle alone." Slack raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Fair point, Miss Marple. Sergeant, make a note of that." The morning room, with its floral wallpaper and view of the rose garden, became the hub of the investigation. The 4 dinner guests, Geoffrey Bantry, Lydia Thorne, Dr. Elias Hargrove, and Miss Eleanor Finch, were summoned, each arriving with a mix of apprehension and defensiveness. Miss Marple sipped a cup of Earl Grey, her eyes darting from face to face, noting every gesture, every pause, as if cataloging seeds for planting. Geoffrey Bantry was first, slouching into a chair with a cigarette dangling from his fingers. His suit was crumpled, his eyes bloodshot, suggesting a restless night. "I don't know what you think I've done, Inspector," he said, his voice edged with defiance. "Uncle Arthur was like a father to me. Financial ruin behind a polished facade." "Arthur was meticulous about his wines," Lydia said smoothly. "He checked every bottle himself. If there was poison, it must have been added after he opened it." "And where were you before dinner, Mrs. Thorne?" Inspector Slack asked. "I was in my room, resting," she replied. "I had a headache. Dolly can confirm I asked for tea." Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple recalled how Lydia had lingered near the Colonel's wine display the previous evening, her fingers brushing the bottles with a certain intensity. Dr. Hargrove followed, his scholarly air unruffled despite the circumstances. He adjusted his glasses and spoke calmly. "I examined the Colonel immediately after he collapsed. The almond-like smell of cyanide was unmistakable. As for my own actions, I was in my surgery until just before dinner, preparing prescriptions." He confirmed prescribing a heart tonic for the Colonel, but insisted it contained no toxins. My medical supplies include cyanide for pest control, but they're locked in my cabinet. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. She had noticed a faint stain on his cuff during dinner. Wine, perhaps, or something else. It reminded her of a chemist in St. Mary Mead who had once spilled ink while forging a label. "Do you often handle such poisons, doctor?" she asked. "Only as needed," he replied, meeting her gaze, "and always with care." Miss Eleanor Finch was last, her apron twisted nervously in her hands as she stood before the inspector. Her broad face was flushed, her gray bun slightly askew. "I polished the glasses and set the table, sir," she said, "but I never touched the wine itself. I've served the Bantrys for 20 years. Why would I harm the colonel?" "Indeed," Miss Marple murmured, her tone kind but probing. "You must know every corner of Rose Hall, Miss Finch. Did you notice anything unusual in the cellar or kitchen yesterday?" Eleanor's eyes widened briefly. "No, miss. Everything was as it should be." But her fingers tightened on her apron, a gesture Miss Marple recognized from a maid long ago who had concealed a theft. As the inspector dismissed the guests to begin, "Art all they seem?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to a village widow who had once pawned her rings to maintain appearances. "And Miss Finch?" she asked. "Oh, Eleanor's devoted, but Arthur mentioned she'd been short-tempered lately. Something about missin' silver spoons." Dolly sighed. "Could it really be one of them, Jane?" "People surprise us, Dolly," Miss Marple said softly. "Even those we think we know." As the morning wore on, Inspector Slack returned from the cellar, his face grim. "Found a smudged footprint in the dust down there, small, like a woman's shoe. And one of the crates had been pried open, though the bottles looked untouched." He fixed his gaze on Miss Marple. "Any thoughts, miss?" She smiled faintly. "Only that clues, like roses, can be misleading if you don't know their roots. Perhaps you might check the kitchen, Inspector. Servants often see more than they say." Slack grunted but sent his sergeant to investigate. Miss Marple settled back with her tea, her mind weaving together the threads. Geoffrey's tremor, Lydia's envy, Hargrove's stain, Eleanor's nerves, the glove, the footprint. Each was a clue, but which were petals and which were thorns? She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a misplaced hairpin had unraveled a lie. The truth, she knew, lay in the ordinary, waiting for a keen eye to see it. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Village. The sun climbed higher over St. Mary Mead, burning away the morning mist and casting a warm glow on the cobblestone lanes. By noon, the village was abuzz with talk of Colonel Bantry's death, the word poison slipping from lips in the butcher's shop, the post office, and the Blue Boar Inn. St. Mary Mead, with its thatched cottages and blooming hedgerows, was no stranger to gossip, but a murder at Rose Hall was a scandal of unprecedented proportions. Miss Jane Marple, back in her cottage for a brief respite, sat by her parlor fire, a cup of tea cooling on the table. Her knitting lay untouched, her mind too occupied with the puzzle of the poisoned wine. She had seen the Hartnell, wiping flour from her hands, spotted her at once. "Miss Marple, have you heard? Poison in the colonel's wine. They say young Geoffrey's to blame. Up to his ears in debt, that one." Miss Marple smiled faintly, settling at a corner table. "Rumors do fly, Miss Hartnell. What exactly have you heard about Mr. Bantry?" The postmistress, Mrs. Price, leaned over from a nearby table, her eyes gleaming. "Oh, it's true. My cousin's boy delivers telegrams in London, and he says Geoffrey owes thousands to some shady lenders. Argued with the colonel last week, right in the Rose Hall garden. Heard it myself when I passed by with the post." "Indeed," Miss Marple murmured, stirring her tea. The information was not new, but the intensity of Geoffrey's argument piqued her interest. It reminded her of a young man in her youth who had shouted at his father over money, only to be innocent of worse crimes. And what did they argue about? Money, of course, Mrs. Price said. The colonel was fed up with bailing him out, said he'd cut him off if he didn't shape up. She lowered her voice. Mind you, I saw Geoffrey at the station 2 days ago, meeting a man in a dark coat. Looked like trouble. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. A man in a dark coat could be a creditor, or a red herring, like the stranger who had once distracted a village from a local thief. She thanked Miss Hartnell for the tea and stepped out into the crisp air, her eyes scanning the village green. Children played near the duck pond, and the vicar's wife was pinning notices for the harvest festival on the church board. St. Mary Mead seemed peaceful, but beneath its surface, secrets simmered. Back at Rose Hall, Dolly Bantry was pacing the morning room, her floral dress crumpled from a sleepless night. Miss Marple found her by the window, staring at the rose garden where the colonel had loved to walk. "Jane, I can't bear it," Dolly said, her voice trembling. "The police are poking about, and everyone's whispering about Geoffrey. But there's more. Arthur was planning to change his will. Geoffrey would get the estate, but deceptive." She patted Dolly's hand. "You must rest, my dear. I'll take a turn about the house, if I may." With Dolly's permission, Miss Marple made her way to Dr. Elias Hargrove's surgery, a small brick building near the village green. The doctor was sorting papers at his desk, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting in the lamplight. "Miss Marple, what a surprise," he said, though his smile seemed strained. "I suppose you're here about the colonel." "I am, doctor," she said, settling into a chair. "You mentioned cyanide at dinner, such a curious poison. Do you keep it here?" Hargrove nodded, gesturing to a locked cabinet. "For pest control, yes. Rats in the village barns, you know. But it's secure, and I've checked, none missing." He paused, then added, "I saw the colonel last week for his heart condition. He was under stress, talking about family troubles." Miss Marple's gaze fell on a faint stain on his cuff, dark and slightly glossy. Wine, ink, or something else? It reminded her of a pharmacist who had once left a telltale mark on his sleeve. "You must be busy with deliveries," she said lightly. "I heard a van brought medical supplies recently." "Yes, just last week," Hargrove replied, his fingers tapping the desk. "Routine order, nothing unusual." But his eyes darted to the cabinet, and Miss Marple noted the gesture, like a villager who had hidden a forbidden bottle during Prohibition. As she left the surgery, she passed the Rose Hall kitchens, where Miss Eleanor Finch was scrubbing pots with unusual vigor. The housekeeper's broad face was flushed, her apron damp from work. Miss Marple paused at the door, her voice soft. "You must be dreadfully shaken, Miss Finch. Did you notice anything odd before dinner? Perhaps in the cellar?" Eleanor's hands stilled, her eyes flickering. "No, miss. I was too busy with the table settings. The colonel's wines were his pride. I never touched them." But as she spoke, Miss Marple heard a faint catch in her voice, like a servant girl she once knew who had lied about a broken vase. On impulse, Miss Marple stepped closer, her eyes catching a glint on, stepped back, her mind racing. The exchange was telling, like a quarrel she once witnessed between a maid and a lady's companion over stolen lace. By late afternoon, Miss Marple sat with Dolly in the drawing room, the fire crackling softly. The clues were mounting. Geoffrey's argument, Lydia's debts, Hargrove's stain, Eleanor's tension, the glove in the garden, the footprint in the cellar. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but some were surely distractions, like the false trails in a village mystery years ago when a stolen brooch led to the wrong suspect. "Jane, do you think it's one of them?" Dolly asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Someone we trusted?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes distant. "Trust is a fragile thing, Dolly. But truth has a way of blooming, given time." She thought of the harvest festival where villagers would gather tomorrow, their chatter a rich soil for secrets. The poisoned wine she knew was only the surface of a deeper root, and she would dig until she found it. Chapter 4. The Hidden Letter. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gardens of Rose Hall, where the roses, still vibrant in their autumn bloom, seemed to nod in silent witness to the tragedy within. St. Mary Mead, though bustling with the preparations for the upcoming harvest festival, remained gripped by the mystery of Colonel Bantry's death. The village lanes echoed with whispers of poison and betrayal, and every glance seemed to carry a question. Who had dared to tamper with the Colonel's prized wine? Miss Jane Marple, back at Rose Hall at Dolly's insistence, sat in the morning room, her black handbag at her side, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room as if it were a puzzle board. She had not picked up her knitting today. Her mind was too busy weaving together the threads of the case. The glove in the garden, the smudged footprint, the stain on Dr. Hargrove's cuff, the tension in Eleanor Finch's voice. Each was a clue, but some she knew were mere distractions, like the false scents in a gun. "Doesn't pay debts," Slack said, his tone clipped. "We're bringing him in for questioning. Care to join us, Miss Marple? You seem to have a knack for noticing things." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression mild. "I'd be glad to, Inspector." She followed him to the study, a wood-paneled room lined with books and adorned with hunting trophies. Geoffrey Bantry was already there, slouched in a leather chair, his face pale but defiant. His cigarette trembled slightly as he lit it, the smoke curling upward like a question mark. "Inspector, this is nonsense," Geoffrey said, his voice sharp. "That letter's a fake. I never wrote it. Yes, I owe money, everyone knows that, but I'd never ask Uncle Arthur for a loan like that. He was already fed up with my mistakes." Slack held up the letter, a single sheet of paper with crisp, typed text and a scrawled signature. "This says otherwise. Care to explain?" Geoffrey's eyes narrowed. "I didn't write it. Someone's trying to frame me." His gaze flicked to Miss Marple, almost pleading. "You believe me, don't you?" Miss Marple studied him, noting the sweat on his brow, the way his fingers crushed the cigarette. It reminded her of a young clerk in St. Mary Mead who had been wrongly accused of theft, his nerves betraying fear rather than guilt. "The truth has a way of surfacing, Mr. Bantry," she said gently. "But tell me, did you handle any papers in this room recently?" "No," Geoffrey said quickly. "I only came in here to talk to Uncle Arthur about the wine collection. He wanted me to take an interest." Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the desk where an ink bottle sat slightly askew, a faint smear on its rim. A clue, perhaps, or another distraction. She filed it away, her mind turning to the cellar where the poisoned wine had been stored. "Inspector," she said, "might we examine the wine cellar more closely? The poison was added there, I presume." Slack nodded, though his impatience was clear. "Already checked it, but fine. Let's go." The cellar was cool and dim, its stone walls lined with racks of bottles, their labels gleaming faintly in the light of a single bulb. The air smelled of dust. Remembered. Lydia borrowed the cellar key a few days ago. Said she needed a bottle for a headache. Could she? Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. Mrs. Thorne is fond of wine, is she not? Did she return the key promptly? Yes, I think so, Dolly said, frowning. But she was in the cellar alone for a bit. Back in the morning room, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sifting through the clues. The letter was troubling, but its typed precision suggested forethought, not the hasty scrawl of a desperate nephew. The footprint, too, was too convenient, like a clue left to mislead. She thought of Lydia's sleek composure, her fingers brushing the wine bottles at dinner, and of Eleanor's nervous apron twisting. Each suspect had opportunity, but motive was murkier. As the afternoon waned, a new piece of gossip reached Rose Hall, carried by a breathless housemaid. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," she said, "the village is talking. They say Dr. Hargrove was seen near Rose Hall late at night 2 evenings ago, carrying a satchel. Looked ever so secretive." Dolly's eyes widened. "Elias? But he's our doctor." Miss Marple's expression remained calm, though her mind was alert. "Did anyone see where he went?" she asked. "No, miss," the maid said. "Just walking by the gate, then gone." Inspector Slack, overhearing, summoned Dr. Hargrove at once. The doctor arrived, his gray suit immaculate, though his glasses slipped slightly as he adjusted them. "A late-night walk?" he said, frowning. "Yes, I suppose I was out that evening. I often walk to clear my mind. No satchel, though, just my coat and hat." Miss Marple noted his quick denial, like a schoolmaster she once knew who had covered a lie with too much detail. "You must pass Rose Hall often, doctor," she said. "Did you notice anything unusual that night?" "Nothing at all," Hargrove replied, though his fingers tapped his knee. The manor was quiet. The day drew to a close with no arrests, but tension fire, the clues swirling in her mind. The forged letter, the delicate footprint, the missing glove, Hargrove's walk, Eleanor's nerves. Each was a petal in a rose, but which held the thorn of truth. She thought of the harvest festival tomorrow, where the village would gather, their chatter a rich soil for secrets. The poisoned wine was a puzzle, and she was determined to solve it. One careful observation at a time. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. The late afternoon light bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, softening the edges of its thatched cottages and casting long shadows across the village green. Preparations for the harvest festival were in full swing, with children stringing paper lanterns and farmers hauling baskets of apples to the church hall. Yet, the air carried a chill of unease, as whispers of Colonel Bantry's poisoning lingered like mist in the hedgerows. At Rose Hall, Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing room, her black handbag resting on the arm of a chintz chair, her sharp blue eyes fixed on a vase of wilting roses. The clues, the monogrammed glove, the smudged footprint, the forged letter, Dr. Hargrove's late-night walk, were like scattered seeds, some destined to sprout truth, others to wither as distractions. She had not touched her knitting today. Her mind was too occupied with the puzzle of the poisoned wine. Dolly Bantry, her face drawn with worry, paced by the fireplace. "Jane, it's all so confusing," she said, twisting a handkerchief. "The inspector's convinced Jeffrey's involved, but now they're looking at Lydia too. And Eleanor. She's been so odd lately. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple's expression was gentle, but her mind was alert. People often hide their true selves, Dolly, like roses concealing thorns. Tell me, what do you know of Mrs. Thorne's past, before she came back to St. Mary Mead? Dolly hesitated, then sat beside her. Lydia's first husband, Charles, was a wine merchant in London. Died about 10 years ago, quite suddenly. They said it was an accident, something about a faulty gas heater. But there were rumors. Poison, some whispered. Nothing was proven, of course. Her voice dropped. She came here after claiming Arthur owed her for Charles's share in the family business. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to a village widow who had once been suspected of tampering with her husband's tea. And how did the Colonel feel about her claims? He was in. Marple paused by a stall where Geoffrey Bantry was helping to unload pumpkins, his sleeves rolled up, his face flushed from effort. "Mr. Bantry," she said, approaching with a smile. "You seem to be keeping busy." Geoffrey wiped his brow, his smile strained. "Trying to stay out of trouble, Miss Marple. The inspector's got it in for me. Thinks that letter proves I'm a killer. But I swear, I loved Uncle Arthur. Yes, I've got debts, but I'd never." His voice cracked and he looked away, his hands clenching. Miss Marple noted the sincerity in his tone, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Like a young man she once knew who had confessed to gambling but not to theft. "You were close to your uncle," she said gently. "Did he ever mention anything unusual about his wine collection? Perhaps a bottle he was particularly protective of?" Geoffrey frowned. He was odd about one bottle, a 1928 Bordeaux, not the one we drank. Kept it locked in a special case. Said it was priceless and not to be touched. He shrugged, thought it was just his usual fussiness. This was new, and Miss Marple's interest sharpened. A locked bottle suggested something beyond mere value. Perhaps a secret tied to the custom mystery theme. She thanked Geoffrey and moved on, her eyes catching a familiar figure near the church. Dr. Elias Hargrove, sketching wildflowers in a small notebook. "Dr. Hargrove," she called, approaching. "You have an eye for botany, I see." The doctor started, closing his notebook quickly. "Just a hobby, Miss Marple. Keeps the mind sharp." His glasses slipped slightly and he adjusted them with a nervous twitch. "I suppose you're still thinking about the Colonel." "Indeed," she said, her tone mild. "Your mention of cyanide intrigued me. I noticed your garden has foxgloves. Digitalis, isn't it? A heart poison, though not cyanide." Hargrove's smile was tight. "Yes, but I assure you my cyanide is for pests, not people. All accounted for." He gestured to his surgery nearby. "I've checked my stock since the inspector asked." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on his notebook, where a faint wary. "Got to keep busy, miss. The Colonel would have wanted it." Her voice was gruff, but a tremor betrayed her. "You've been with the Bantrys so long," Miss Marple said kindly. "It must be hard, with all this talk of poison. Did you ever hear the Colonel mention trouble with his wines?" Eleanor's lips tightened. "He was particular about them, miss. Didn't like anyone in the cellar but him. Last week he caught me there, checking for dust I was, and he was cross. Said I'd no business near his bottles." She resumed kneading, her hands shaking slightly. Miss Marple noted the defensiveness, like a maid she once knew who had been caught pilfering sugar. "And Mrs. Thorne? She was in the cellar too, wasn't she?" Eleanor's eyes flashed. "She had no right taking that key. always acting like she owns the place. Her words echoed the pantry argument Miss Marple had overheard, and she filed it away. As dusk settled, Miss Marple returned to the manor, where Inspector Slack was reviewing notes in the study. "Found something else," he said, holding up a small vial from Geoffrey's room. "Looks like one of Dr. Hargrove's tonics, but we're testing it. Could be cyanide." Miss Marple examined the vial, its label smudged but legible. "Curious," she said. "It's not sealed, Inspector. Anyone could have placed it there." Slack grunted. "Maybe, but it's another mark against young Bantry." Back in the drawing room, Dolly shared another revelation. "Jane, I remembered something. Eleanor asked Arthur for a loan last month. Said she needed it for her sister's medical bills. He refused and she was upset. Could she?" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Desperation can lead to desperate acts, Dolly. But we must be careful not to judge too quickly." She thought of a village seamstress who had stolen to pay a debt, only to be innocent of greater crimes. As night fell, the clues swirled in her mind. Lydia's shadowy past, Geoffrey's locked bottle, Hargrove's smudged notebook, handbag tucked under her arm. The clues, the forged letter, the smudged footprint, the locked bottle, the vial in Geoffrey's room, swirled in her mind like leaves caught in an autumn breeze. Some were true leads, she knew, but others were false trails, like the misleading paths in a garden maze she once navigated as a girl. At Rose Hall, the investigation had taken a dramatic turn. Inspector Slack, his face set with determination, had arrested Geoffrey Bantry that morning, citing the forged letter and the vial as damning evidence. "Case closed," he declared to Dolly Bantry in the morning room, his voice brimming with confidence. "Your nephew had motive, debts up to his ears, and opportunity. That vial in his room? Tests confirmed traces of cyanide." Dolly, pale and trembling, clutched a lace handkerchief. "It can't be Geoffrey, Inspector. He's reckless, yes, but not a murderer." She turned to Miss Marple, who sat quietly by the window, her expression calm but alert. "Jane, tell him he's wrong." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice gentle but firm. "Things are not always as they seem, Inspector. Evidence can be planted, like weeds in a flower bed. Might I see the vial again?" Slack, though visibly irritated, handed her the small glass bottle, its label smudged but marked with Dr. Hargrove's insignia. Miss Marple examined it closely, noting its cork was loose, easily tampered with. "This was found in Mr. Bantry's room," she said. "But anyone could have placed it there. Have you considered who else had access?" Slack grunted. "We're not amateurs, Miss Marple. The room was locked and only Geoffrey had the key." "Keys can be borrowed," she replied mildly, her mind drifting to a village locksmith who had once been duped by a clever thief. She handed the vial back, her eyes catching a faint scratch on its rim, like a mark left by a hurried hand. Determined to test the inspector's conclusions, Miss Marple suggested revisiting the wine cellar. The group, Slack, Dolly, and Miss Marple, descended the stone steps. The air cool and heavy with the scent confirmed it. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging the alibi. Lydia's composure, her headache excuse, and her cellar visit were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was incomplete. She scanned the cellar, her eyes catching a glint in the corner, a torn wine label, half buried in dust. She pointed it out to Slack. "This may be significant, Inspector." Slack retrieved it, his brow furrowing. "From the poisoned bottle. But why's it here? The bottle was upstairs. Perhaps it was torn off during tampering, Miss Marple suggested, though she noted the label's edges were uneven, as if ripped in haste. It reminded her of a shopkeeper who had once hidden a forged receipt in a bin. Back in the drawing room, the investigation took another twist. A housemaid burst in, her face flushed. "Inspector, sir, they found this in Dr. Hargrove's surgery wastebasket. A torn label, just like the one in the cellar." Slack's eyes narrowed. "Hargrove? He's got some explaining to do." Dr. Hargrove was summoned, his scholarly air strained as he entered, his glasses slipping down his nose. "A label in my wastebasket," he said, his voice tight. "Utter nonsense. Someone's planted it to incriminate me. I haven't been near the Colonel's wine." Miss Marple observed his agitation, his fingers tapping his notebook, a gesture she had noted before. "You keep a tidy surgery, Doctor," she said. "It's curious that such a thing would end up there. Do you often dispose of papers?" "Only routine notes," he replied, his eyes darting to the side. "This is a frame-up, I tell you." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her mind turning to a village apothecary who had been caught hiding evidence in plain sight. The label was a false trail, she suspected, but by whom? She recalled the red smudge on Hargrove's notebook. Could it be wine? Or something more sinister? As the day progressed, Miss Marple slipped away to the Harvest Festival, hoping the village's chatter would yield new insights. The green was crowded with fiddlers playing and villagers sampling cider against a nosy guest. Approaching Lydia, Miss Marple found her inspecting a bottle with a faded label, her fingers tracing its edge. "Mrs. Thorne," she said, "you have an eye for vintages. Did the Colonel ever share his collection with you?" Lydia's smile was cool. "Arthur was possessive about his wines. He showed me a few, but I'm no expert. My late husband was the connoisseur." Her hand lingered on her pendant, a gesture Miss Marple noted as defensive. As the festival wound down, Miss Marple returned to Rose Hall, her mind sifting through the day's discoveries. The vial, the footprint, the torn labels, Jeffrey's arrest, all pointed in different directions, like paths in a tangled garden. She sat with Dolly by the fire, the room warm with the scent of burning logs. "Jane, do you think Jeffrey's guilty?" Dolly asked, her voice small. "Or is it Lydia, with her past? Or someone else?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes distant. "The truth is like a rose, Dolly. It blooms slowly, but its roots run deep. We must look beyond the obvious." She thought of the locked bottle Jeffrey had mentioned, its significance still unclear. Was it tied to the custom mystery theme? Perhaps a vintage with a hidden secret. The festival had revealed no new clues, but the villagers' whispers confirmed the suspect's motives. Jeffrey's debts, Lydia's greed, Hargrove's access, Eleanor's resentment. As night fell, Miss Marple wandered the garden, pausing by the bench where the glove had been. The indentation in the soil was still there, faint but telling. She knelt, her fingers brushing the earth, and found a tiny glass shard, glinting in the moonlight. A piece of the vial, perhaps, or something else. It reminded her of a broken bottle in a long-ago mystery, discarded to hide a crime. The false trails were multiplying, but Miss Marple knew the truth lay in the ordinary. A gesture, a glance, a misplaced shard. Tomorrow, she would dig deeper, like a guard paced the morning room. "Jane, it's too much," she said, her voice trembling. "Jeffrey's been released. The inspector says the letter's ink was too fresh to be genuine. But now they're looking at Lydia, and I can't bear the thought of it being someone we know." Miss Marple patted her hand, her expression gentle but her mind alert. "Truth often hides in plain sight, Dolly, like a weed among roses. Tell me, has Mrs. Thorne been acting strangely since the dinner?" Dolly frowned, twisting her handkerchief. "She's been quieter, always fingering that pendant of hers. And yesterday at the festival I saw her slip into the church alone. Odd, since she's never been religious." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. Lydia's behavior suggested unease, like a village widow she once knew who had visited a chapel to hide stolen goods. She rose, her gaze drifting to the garden visible through the window. "I think a walk in the rose garden might clear my thoughts," she said. "Would you care to join me?" Dolly declined, too distressed. So Miss Marple ventured out alone, her footsteps soft on the gravel path. The roses were in full autumn glory, their petals vivid against the green. But her attention was drawn to a bench near the spot where she had found the monogrammed glove. The soil beneath it was disturbed, the indentation she had noticed yesterday now slightly deeper, as if someone had returned. Kneeling carefully, she brushed away the earth and found a small, cracked vial, its label faint but bearing traces of a chemical scent. Not quite the almond-like odor of cyanide, but something herbal, perhaps tied to the custom method. It was a significant find, and she wrapped it in her handkerchief, her mind racing. The vial suggested carelessness, or perhaps a deliberate plant, like a broken locket she once found in a garden that had pointed to the wrong culprit. She recalled Jeffrey's mention of the locked bottle, a 1928 Bordeaux kept separate from the others. Could it be connected to the custom mystery? Perhaps a vintage with a hidden significance. She resolved to examine the cellar again. Back at Rose Hall, Inspector Slack was in the study, his notebook filled with script. A visit to the kitchen was in order. In the kitchen, Eleanor Finch was polishing silver, her hands moving with a nervous energy. Her apron was crisp, but Miss Marple noticed a faint stain on its hem. Herbal, like the vial's scent, not the red speck from before. "Miss Finch," she said, her voice kind. "You've been working tirelessly. Do you ever clean Dr. Hargrove's surgery? I hear he has quite a collection of supplies." Eleanor's hands paused, her eyes wary. "Aye, miss. I clean there once a week for extra pay. But I don't touch his medicines. Too risky." Her voice was steady, but her fingers twisted the polishing cloth, a gesture Miss Marple recognized from a maid who had once hidden a stolen brooch. "You must see many things," Miss Marple said. "Did you ever notice anything unusual in the surgery? Say, a missing vial?" Eleanor shook her head quickly. "No, miss, everything's locked up tight." But her eyes darted to the side, and Miss Marple noted the lie, like a gardener spotting a wilted leaf. Later at the harvest festival, Miss Marple wandered among the stalls, her ears attuned to the village gossip. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, was chatting with a farmer near a cider stall. "Heard Dr. Hargrove's been ordering strange herbs lately," she whispered. "Not his usual tonics, something foreign, from a London apothecary." Miss Marple approached, her smile disarming. "Foreign herbs, Mrs. Price? That sounds intriguing." "Oh, yes," Mrs. Price said, eager to share. "My nephew saw the delivery. A crate marked with some odd symbol like a vine. Came just before the Colonel's dinner." This was new, and Miss Marple's mind turned to the custom village location. perhaps a vineyard with a history tied to the custom mystery theme. She recalled the herbal scent of the vial. Could it be a poison other than cyanide, linked to Hargrove's supplies? She made a mental note to visit his surgery again. At Rose Hall, she found Dr. Hargrove in the drawing room, discussing exasperated. "We've tested every bottle," he said. "Only the one from the dinner had cyanide. But this locked bottle Jeffrey mentioned, it's odd. The case is scratched, like someone tried to force it." Miss Marple examined the case, a sturdy wooden box with a brass lock. The scratches were fresh and a faint residue clung to the edge, herbal, like the vial. "This may be our key," she said, her voice soft. "Not cyanide, perhaps, but something tied to the custom method." Back in the drawing room, Dolly shared another piece of the puzzle. "Jane, I found a note in Arthur's desk, hidden in a book. It's from Eleanor, begging for a loan. She said her sister's illness was ruining her. Arthur wrote no on it." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Eleanor's desperation, Lydia's past, Hargrove's herbs, Jeffrey's release. The clues were aligning, but the truth remained elusive. She thought of a village scandal where a hidden note had revealed a motive, but only half the story. As night settled over Rose Hall, Miss Marple stood in the garden, the stars bright above the roses. The vial's herbal scent, the scratched case, the note, all pointed to a deeper motive, perhaps tied to the custom mystery. Tomorrow she would confront the suspects, her mind as sharp as a gardener's shears, ready to cut through the thorns of deception. Chapter 8. Piecing the Puzzle. The second day of the harvest festival waned over St. Mary Mead. The village green aglow with lanterns as dusk settled, their soft light dancing on the faces of villagers savoring the last of the cider and pies. The air was thick with the scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke, but the festive cheer was undercut by the unresolved mystery of Colonel Bantry's death. At Rose Hall, Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing room, a cup of tea cooling beside her, her black handbag resting on the table. Her sharp blue eyes, undimmed by the gathering twilight, sifted through the clues that had accumulated like fallen petals. The forged letter, the smudged footprint. Thorne's past is curious, is it not? And Miss Finch's desperation. Those are roots we must explore. Dolly nodded, her eyes wide. Lydia's been so secretive, always clutching that pendant. And Eleanor, she's been with us forever, but that note, she must have been desperate. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window, where the rose garden lay bathed in moonlight. The cracked vial she had found there with its faint herbal scent suggested a poison other than cyanide, perhaps linked to the custom method. She recalled a village apothecary who had once mistaken a harmless tincture for a deadly one, a mistake that had unraveled a mystery. "I think another look at the cellar might help," she said, rising. "Would you ask Inspector Slack to join me?" The cellar was dim, its stone walls cool and its air heavy with the scent of aged oak. Inspector Slack, his notebook in hand, followed Miss Marple reluctantly, his patience wearing thin. "We've been over this place twice, Miss Marple," he said. "What are you hoping to find?" "Sometimes, Inspector, it's the smallest detail that matters," she replied, her voice soft. She knelt by the crate of the 1928 Bordeaux where the poisoned bottle had been stored. The scratched wooden case which housed the locked bottle Jeffrey had described caught her eye. She traced its edges, noting a faint residue, herbal like the vial. "This case," she said, "has been tampered with recently. And this residue, could it be tested?" Slack frowned but nodded. "I'll have it sent to the lab. but it's probably just dust. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her mind turning to the custom village location. Perhaps a vineyard with a history of rare herbs. The residue suggested a poison tied to the custom method, not cyanide, but something subtler like a floral extract. She recalled the wilted roses near the garden bench, their petals curled as if touched by a chemical. "And the glasses from the dinner?" she asked. "Any traces there?" "Only the colonel's glass had cyanide," Slack said. "The others were clean." This was telling. The poison had been targeted, not random, suggesting intimate knowledge of the colonel's habits. Miss Marple's thought away, but her voice trembled, and Miss Marple noted the lie, like a gardener spotting a wilted stem. "You were fond of the colonel," Miss Marple said gently, "but his refusal of your loan must have hurt. Did he ever suspect you of anything?" Eleanor's face flushed. "He thought I took some silver spoons, said he'd dismiss me if it happened again. But I didn't steal, I swear." Her eyes darted to the cellar door, and Miss Marple filed the reaction away. At the festival, Miss Marple sought out Lydia Thorne, who was browsing a stall of antique glassware, her diamond pendant glinting. "Mrs. Thorne," Miss Marple said, "you seem drawn to fine things. Did the colonel's wine collection ever tempt you?" Lydia's smile was cool. "Arthur's wines were his obsession, not mine. My late husband taught me enough to know their value, but I had no reason to touch them." Her fingers brushed her pendant, a gesture Miss Marple noted as defensive, like a village heiress who had once hidden her debts behind a dazzling smile. "You were in the cellar recently," Miss Marple said. "Did you notice anything unusual?" Lydia hesitated. "Just dust and bottles. Arthur was so particular, no one could touch his precious Bordeaux." Her voice was smooth, but her eyes flickered, and Miss Marple sensed a half-truth. Dr. Hargrove was next, found near the church, sketching a sprig of lavender in his notebook. His glasses slipped as he looked up, his scholarly air tinged with unease. "Dr. Hargrove," Miss Marple said, "your interest in herbs is fascinating. Have you ever used anything from the custom village location? Perhaps a rare plant?" Hargrove's fingers tapped his notebook. "Just common herbs for tonics," he said. "The colonel asked me about his will, you know. Wanted to cut Jeffrey out. I advised him to think it over." His voice was calm, but his eyes avoided hers like a chemist Miss Marple once knew, who had concealed a dangerous formula. Back at the weeds to see the flowers. She thought of the custom mystery theme, perhaps a vintage tied to a secret in the custom village location. The herbal residue suggested a poison crafted with care, not the blunt cyanide of the colonel's glass. Tomorrow's confrontation would test her theory, and she would need all her wits to untangle the thorns of deception. Chapter 9. The Drawing Room Confrontation. The evening air in St. Mary Mead was thick with the scent of autumn leaves as the harvest festival drew to a close. The village green now quiet, save for the soft glow of lanterns swaying in the breeze. At Rose Hall, the grand Georgian manor stood somber under the moonlight, its ivy-clad walls a silent witness to the tragedy within. Inside, Miss Jane Marple had gathered everyone in the drawing room, the fire casting flickering shadows on the chintz curtains and polished mahogany. Her black handbag rested on a side table, her navy frock neat as ever, but her sharp blue eyes gleamed with purpose. The clues, the forged letter, the smudged footprint, the locked bottle, the torn label, the cracked vial, the hidden key, and Eleanor Finch's desperate note had woven a complex tapestry, and tonight she would unravel it. The truth, she knew, lay in the ordinary, like a rosebud hiding a thorn. Dolly Bantry sat by the fire, her face pale, her floral dress crumpled. Beside her stood Inspector Slack, his notebook tucked away, his expression a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Geoffrey Bantry slouched in an armchair, his cigarette unlit, his eyes wary. Lydia Thorne, elegant in black silk, fingered her diamond pendant, her composure a thin veneer. Dr. Elias Hargrove adjusted his glasses, his scholarly air tinged with unease. Miss Eleanor Finch, her apron discarded for a plain dress, stood near the door, her hands clasped tightly. The room was heavy with anticipation, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire. Miss Marple rose, her voice calm but commanding. "Good evening, everyone. We are here to uncover the truth about Colonel Bantry's death and divert suspicion. The true poison was subtler, tied to the custom method, a floral extract, perhaps from a rare herb in the custom village location, a vineyard with a history of secrets. It was administered not in the wine bottle, but in the Colonel's glass, by someone who knew his habits." Dolly gasped, clutching her handkerchief. "But who, Jane? Who would do such a thing?" Miss Marple's eyes moved to Geoffrey. "Mr. Bantry, your debts gave you motive, and your access to the cellar raised suspicion. But your sincerity at the festival, and the fact that the vial was planted in your room, clears you. Someone wanted you blamed." Geoffrey exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. "Thank God. I told you I'd never hurt Uncle Arthur." She turned to Lydia. "Mrs. Thorne, your past, a husband who died under mysterious circumstances, cast a shadow. Your debts, hidden behind fake jewels, and your visit to the cellar suggested opportunity. But your alibi with the vicar's wife holds, and your unease seems born of fear, not guilt." Lydia's hand tightened on her pendant, her voice sharp. "I've done nothing wrong. My husband's death was an accident." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze shifting to Dr. Hargrove. "Doctor, your access to cyanide and your herbal deliveries raised questions. The smudged notebook, the late-night walk near Rose Hall, these pointed to you. But your concern for the Colonel's health was genuine, and the torn label in your wastebasket was another plant." Hargrove's glasses slipped, his voice steady but strained. "I'm a physician, not a murderer. My herbs are for healing." Finally, Miss Marple's eyes settled on Eleanor Finch, whose hands trembled despite her rigid stance. "Miss Finch, you've served the Bantrys loyally for years. But loyalty can turn to resentment when trust is broken. The Colonel accused you of stealing silver, threatened to dismiss you. Your note, begging for a loan, showed your desperation. And your hands, stained not with wine but with a floral extract, betray your actions." "Eleanor, how could you?" Inspector Slack stepped forward, his voice gruff but astonished. "Well deduced, Miss Marple. I'd never have thought the housekeeper." He signaled to his sergeant, who gently escorted Eleanor from the room, her sobs echoing in the hall. Miss Marple sat down, her expression somber. "Human nature is complex, Dolly. Desperation can twist even the most loyal heart. Eleanor used the custom method, a poison from the custom village location, thinking it would go unnoticed. But the truth always blooms, given time." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over them. Geoffrey lit his cigarette, his hands steady now. Lydia released her pendant, her composure softening. Hargrove adjusted his glasses, a look of relief crossing his face. The fire crackled, casting warmth into the room. But the chill of betrayal lingered. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple remained with Dolly, her tea untouched. "Jane," Dolly whispered. "How did you know it was Eleanor?" "The little things, Dolly," Miss Marple said softly. Her stained hands, the wilted roses, her nervous twists of the apron. They told a story. Like a village girl I once knew, who hid her guilt in plain sight. The truth had been laid bare, and Rose Hall felt both heavier and lighter for it. Tomorrow, over morning tea, Miss Marple would explain the final threads. But for now, the mystery was solved. The Garden of Secrets pruned to reveal its heart. Chapter 10. Tea and Reflections. The morning after the dramatic confrontation in Rose Hall's drawing room, St. Mary Mead awoke to a gentle autumn sun, its rays filtering through the mist that clung to the village's hedgerows and thatched cottages. The harvest festival had ended, leaving the green strewn with wilted streamers and empty cider jugs. But the village's chatter had shifted from celebration to the shocking revelation of Miss Eleanor Finch's guilt. At Rose Hall, the grand manor stood quieter now, its ivy-clad walls softened by the morning light, as if relieved of a heavy secret. Miss Jane Marple sat in the garden, clues that had unraveled the mystery. The forged letter, the smudged footprint, the locked bottle, the torn label, the cracked vial, the hidden key, and Eleanor's desperate note. Each had played its part, but it was the subtler signs that had guided her. "Let's begin with the roses," she said, gesturing to the garden. They were wilted near the bench where I found the cracked vial, touched by a floral extract, not cyanide, but a poison tied to the custom method, perhaps a rare herb from the custom village location. She thought of a vineyard legend whispered at the festival, about a cursed vintage laced with a deadly flower. Plants, like people, reveal secrets when they suffer. Eleanor spilled the poison while handling it, and the roses paid the price. Dolly's eyes widened. "The roses? I thought they were just neglected." "No garden at Rose Hall is neglected," Miss Marple said gently. Then there were Eleanor's hands, stained not with wine as I first thought, but with the same herbal extract. She polished the colonel's glass, ensuring it carried the poison, and sprinkled cyanide as a red herring to mimic a heart attack. Her access to Dr. Hargrove's surgery, where she cleaned weekly, gave her the opportunity to take the vial. Dolly set down her scone, her voice trembling. "But why, Jane? Why would she do it?" "Desperation," Miss Marple replied. Eleanor's note, hidden in Arthur's desk, showed her need for money. Her sister's illness was a burden she couldn't bear. The colonel's threat to dismiss her over missing silver was the final straw. It reminded me of a village seamstress who, pushed to the edge, stole to save her family. Though her crime was smaller, Eleanor's loyalty turned to resentment, and she saw a chance to protect herself by framing another. Dolly frowned. "Framing? You mean Geoffrey?" "At first," Miss Marple said. "The forged letter, with its fresh ink, was meant to point to him. But the smudged footprint in the cellar, matching Lydia's shoe size, was another distraction. Past. His herbs, that late-night walk." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Dr. Hargrove's herbal deliveries raised suspicion, especially with the custom method tied to the custom village location." But his concern for Arthur was real, and his notebook's smudge was mere ink, not poison. His walk was likely a harmless habit, like a schoolmaster I knew who wandered to clear his mind. Eleanor used his access to cyanide to muddy the waters. Dolly shook her head, marveling. You saw it all, Jane. The little things, her hands, the roses, the note. How do you notice such details? Years of watching people, Dolly, Miss Marple said, her voice soft. In a village, you see the same patterns. Greed, fear, loyalty, betrayal. They're as familiar as the roses in your garden. Eleanor's apron twisting, her quick denials, were like a maid I once knew who hid her guilt in plain sight. The truth blooms when you look closely. The garden was quiet now, save for the chirping of a blackbird and the rustle of leaves. Miss Marple set down her cup, her gaze lingering on the roses. The custom village location played its part, she said. If it's a vineyard, as I suspect, its history of rare herbs gave Eleanor the idea. She knew the Colonel's habits, his favorite glass, his love of that Bordeaux, and used them against him. Dolly sighed, her shoulders relaxing. It's over then. But what happens now? Rose Hall feels empty without Arthur. Miss Marple patted her hand. Time will heal, Dolly. Geoffrey, I believe, will mend his ways. He was shaken, but sincere. Lydia may reconcile with the family now that her secrets are out. Dr. Hargrove will continue his rounds, perhaps with more care about his supplies. And you, my dear, will keep Rose Hall's heart beating. Dolly solved, the truth laid bare. But St. Mary Mead would always hold new secrets, waiting for her keen eye to uncover them. For now she was content, the garden of her mind at peace, ready for the next bloom of intrigue.